Now more with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We're joined by Kevin Freeman, our duty expert on matters involving economic warfare, a senior fellow of the Center for Security Policy, I'm proud to say, with that specialization. He is also, of course, the host of Economic War Room with Kevin Freeman at Blaze TV. You can find out how to see it at economicwarroom.com. And he blogs at globaleconomicwarfare.com, where we came upon a terrific piece by him, which we will be talking about momentarily. Kevin is also the author of two terrific books, Secret Weapon and Game Plan, and is just an extraordinary resource, not least for the work that he's doing at the National Security Investment Consultants Institute, about which we'll talk more here in a moment. Kevin Freeman, welcome back. It's so good to have you, as always. I wanted to talk with you about the coronavirus a little bit, Kevin. We discussed it, got sort of an update on what's happening on the ground, particularly in China. But maybe if I could just ask you to give us a bit of a stock taking, if I can use that expression at the moment, given the volatilities of the stock market. What do you see happening in our economy as a result of what's clearly now roiling both the Chinese economy and its production lines, as well as world markets elsewhere?
Well, we saw the open this morning limit down, which means they stopped trading because the market went down more than 7% at the opening. It's massive panic. Indiscriminate selling, gold has been up occasionally and briefly, but almost everything is in the red. And that is for fear that this virus will create a contagion that will literally shut down restaurants and movie theaters and so forth, so that people will hunker in their homes, won't leave their home either because they've been quarantined or because they're afraid. And that kind of panic is clearly having and will have an impact on our economy.
And to the extent that that's happening, is there any end in sight at the moment, or are we still in the early stages of what could be a very sizable sell-off?
The funny thing is when we're talking a coronavirus, this is a novel coronavirus, and generally we hear the term common cold. This is essentially an uncommon cold. And if it stays in the nasal passages and the throat and just minor, 80-90% of us will get past this with minor symptoms. But at some point, particularly the elderly, it gets into the lungs, and that's where damage is caused mostly by the immune system's response. And I'm not a doctor, but elderly people tend to be hit much harder than this. Will we get past it? Absolutely. We get past a pandemic every 25 to 30 years, I'm told. And as a result, it hits the stock market, it hits the economy. We grow past it. Life goes on for those that are lucky enough to survive, which should be 98+% of us.
So you're taking the long view of this, obviously, and counseling, doing the same with respect to the markets? I mean, I'm not asking you to pass out free advice here, but I'm just interested in your take.
No, absolutely. But what I'd like to say about the markets is the bigger threat is that people panic and react and toss in another administration. Last week we had a circumstance where it looked like Super Tuesday primary dealt a big blow to socialist Joe Biden, and the markets reacted positively in the midst of this coronavirus. And to me, that's an indicator that the greater threat we're facing is the threat of bad decisions where we decide, well, we've got to remove President Trump and put in, XYZ candidate, whether it's Biden or whether it is Sanders. That is a serious threat. That's a problem because socialism is a greater long-term threat to our economy and to our lives than the coronavirus.
Tell us about that, Kevin, because that's a subject of, I think, a recent essay by you, and I'm very keen on exploring that. I don't disagree, needless to say, but I'm interested in what is it about socialism that you find, particularly, I assume, from the economic perspective, but political and strategic as well, that makes it more dangerous to an America than a deadly pandemic?
Well, first off, it's because, as Lawrence said, socialism's purpose is to lead to communism. And when you look at democratically elected socialist leaders, and I don't mean faux socialism like Sanders likes to point to in Denmark and places in Europe. I'm talking about real socialism like they instituted in Venezuela. It ultimately ends in the collapse of the economy because it disincentivizes people from working. It's failed every time it's been tried, whether it was the Plymouth colony. When the first pilgrims came here, they attempted socialism, and it failed miserably, and people died, to the horrifying experiment of the Soviet Union and China today. And if you want to even look, there are like 100 million people that were killed under communist regimes in the last 100 years. If you look today at China and the way that they're responding to this crisis and the way that they're denying freedoms, the way that they're literally, people died in a collapsed hotel. There are all sorts of horrifying stories coming out of this. Organ transplant, somebody was saved with a lung transplant by killing somebody to take the lungs to do it. The things the Committee on the Present Danger China is pointing out, those are true, and that's where socialism ultimately leads. And once socialism gets a grip on the government, it's very rare for the people to turn back to freedoms because they start consolidating power. And so you read repeatedly, I thought, and there's a brilliant essay that came out regarding the Iranian Revolution. I thought the Iranian Revolution would bring freedom. I was wrong. The same mechanisms that bring about socialism are what took place in Iran in the late 1970s.
It's a revolutionary agenda that brings about totalitarianism, whether it's got a god on top of it or not. It's communism, and it definitely is inimical to freedom for the people most immediately involved, and it's a danger to the rest of us, for heaven's sakes. Kevin, let me just ask you about one other piece of this, and that is that to the extent that there's any silver lining, as I was talking about with Gordon Chang, it may be that the kind of policy agenda that President Trump has been encouraging, namely a disengagement from China, a freeing of us from supply chains that are highly problematic, dependencies in China, medicine among many others. How is that translating, as you see it, on the ground, both in China and with respect to manufacturers or purveyors of goods in this country?
Well, first off, we should give President Trump credit. The fact that he woke American companies up to the reality that our supply chains were wholly dependent on communist China gave some opportunity. I don't know how many companies took advantage of it. Some did. That we should adjust where we get the manufacturing of goods, bring it home where possible, find more allied countries to do business with where possible. And the reality is some did, and that awareness is a huge benefit for those that are facing this crisis because the vast majority of the COVID-19 cases remain in mainland China. It shut factories, and so we have shortages. They're not shortages caused by our president. In fact, it would be far worse had we been more in bed with the communist Chinese. Thank goodness for President Trump helping us that. But we have serious ones like the prescription drug one that we talk about with Rosemary Gibson. You've had her on your program. We are very dependent on Chinese medicines. We are now aware of how dangerous that dependence is, both from a geopolitical standpoint, but also from a health standpoint with COVID-19. So he's done a great service for this nation in that respect, and we should be grateful for that.
Let me ask you, I mentioned earlier, Kevin Freeman, that you are the driving force behind a terrific initiative that you call the National Security Investment Consultative Institute. It's designed to help those of us who want to ensure that our money is being used for good purposes as well as remunerative ones. What's the possibility, Kevin, in this environment that we could see Wall Street, which has been massively investing in China for years? You've decried this, as have I, but it's nonetheless been going on, and it seems as though some of the leaders of that financial sector, Larry Fink, for example, at BlackRock, and Steve Schwartzman at Blackstone, and the MSCI, and so on, continue to believe that they need to put our money, in some cases our retirement money, into Chinese companies that are at best problematic and at worst possibly complete frauds. Is there now a chance, Kevin, as you see it, that we might see an America First investment approach adopted instead?
Well, the people who have the money want the America First investment approach. They're going to be shocked when they find out how much of their retirement has been invested overseas in potential adversaries and enemies of the United States. So yes, now is the time. Now is the time for people to stand up and call their advisor and say, look, I want to redirect my investments so that I can put America first. We can rebuild manufacturing so that we don't run out of masks and gowns and pharmaceuticals and other things that are necessary. There's a tragedy that could happen because we've grown so dependent on China. Now is the opportunity for us to redirect and put America first, and we can be then helpful to the rest of the world. I'm not opposed to trade. I think trade is excellent, but it's got to be fair trade, and we've not had anything close to that.
And just a quick word about how people can find out more about your investment training capability, Kevin, and getting access to it for their financial advisors.
Well, you should go to nsic.org, nsic.org, and we'll be putting more and new information coming up. We're talking to Liberty University, and we're very far along with possibly having them start the training program out of Liberty University. So we're very excited. The potential is tremendous.
The potential is tremendous, and the need is acute, needless to say. As ever, Kevin Freeman, you are at the leading edge of thinking and practice of economic security policy, and we're so grateful to you for what you do for us at the Center for Security Policy as well as for our country more generally. Check out his work at an absolutely superb program, economicwarroom.com, with Kevin Freeman at Blaze TV. economicwarroom.com is the website. Kevin, again, thank you. We'll talk with you again next week.